Cheers, everyone. I'm doing a second Sleepy vlog in my vlog countdown. I guess this is number 27, second one in the same day, just to try and catch up a little bit, since I have some free time now. I was talking in my previous vlog about Collider, which I enjoyed. It's probably not the greatest comic book in the world, but I enjoyed it and I got into it. It's a well-done, decent comic book. It's from Vertigo. But one thing I noticed while reading it was there's no real female characters in here. The lead character is part of a team from the FBP, Federal Bureau of Physics. There's no women on his team. The story starts with a flashback to Adam's father, who was a scientist, a physicist, who he never met. So in a way, one of the themes of the story is that the reason why he's on the FPB, I'm assuming, is kind of searching for that missing father. But in fact, the mother is missing from here. The mother who raised him, there's not an image of her in here. There's some passing mention of your mother, and that's about it. And the females we do encounter are women he's picking up for very, very brief encounters. And that's a little character beat about him that he's kind of burning the wick at both ends with work and the shallow encounters with women and stuff. But why no women characters? Why, when you're constructing a brand new comic book that's not a superhero comic book, so you don't have the excuse of that, if that's an excuse at all, why is there no woman on stage here at all, really, who has a personality, a character? Maybe that will change in future issues, but it did make me think about how so often men in a genre that they think of as mostly being for men just don't even think about putting a woman character in things, or putting some strong women characters, or don't stop and ever consider just make the main character a woman. Even if women never read comic books, I think it would make something like this a better comic book, a richer comic book, to reflect our world more with some women in it. And in general, there seems to be a problem that some of us perceive that comic books aren't friendly to women. There's the issue. I should say that I've talked about this with Travis, so some of the ideas I might be throwing out might come from him. I mean, there's the issue of what comic book stores are like in and of themselves, and there's the issue of when you read comic books as a woman, do you want to read any more, and not to mention become a creator and everything. And both Travis and I have daughters, and my daughter is extremely interested in comics. I think Travis' daughter has already learned not to be interested in comic books, but I think she has some interest. And I do feel it's a struggle to find the comics that will grab my daughter's interest. It's also a struggle because she's so young, and it's hard to find good comics for young kids. But it does make me think a lot about what is there for her in these things in the future. It does feel like there is an attempt, because there are a lot of female lead comics at DC and some at Marvel, and Marvel seems to be trying to do more. There are some women writers. I think it's great that we're seeing kind of a rise of very good women artists. And part of what I think is that it's harder to break. I mean, it's very hard to break in as an artist, but I think it's harder to break in as a writer. There's less jobs for writers, and the writing is much more likely to be broken into through a combination of talent and networking skills. And it's hard to network with a group of people who are very different from yourself. And I've noticed in the work life, in my work life, people tend to hire someone that reminds them of themselves in some way or another. So that's always a barrier if you're a different sex than most of the people in the field, or a different race, or just a very different type of person. And when I see lots of video interviews with the pros, like on CBR and other things, and they all seem like the writers all seem like a certain type of male person. And so I can imagine it being just really hard for a woman to make it through, and for many men who aren't that type of person either. But it seems like as you get a more homogenous is not the right word, but a more mixed social group there, it'll be easier for all different kinds of people to break in as writers. And the more you have, for men, the more women you have around, the more conscious you're going to become of these kinds of choices where you think about putting female characters in. Also, it's good to actually have female creators at times writing female characters, but male writers can do good female characters, and women writers can do male characters. But if you have a greater sort of group awareness of what to put into things to make both sexes like them, I think you get an improvement there. So that's pretty much all my thoughts. And maybe I worry about this too much. Maybe there's really already enough, once my daughter's old enough, maybe there's already going to be enough female-oriented for older women comics. Maybe I'm wrong. My sense is, though, that it's not there yet. And it's probably a lot better than it once was. So yeah, because a long, long time ago, I think the only woman in comics was Marie Severin, who did some penciling and a lot of coloring. And she was on the staff of Marvel. And then you got some women writers who came along, like Louise Simonson, who kind of, I think, got their start in the editorial staff. I think that's even true for Ann Nocenti right now. And they have brought in a few writers like, I don't remember her first name, but Lou, who does one of the X-Men books, is basically a fantasy romance writer who somehow got brought into comic books. But I have a feeling it's hard for most women to thrive in the comic book world still, because in the writer side of things, it's very male-oriented. And maybe what will happen is, as more women artists rise to the top, some of them will start writing too and produce comic books that can be more inclusive and draw more people in. I think I've run out of stuff to say on this subject. One thing that worries me is something I talked about. I've now pulled my science fiction experience into these vlogs several times, so I'm just going to keep doing it. One of the things that was a weird thing in science fiction in the 2000s was the rise of paranormal romance, which is great, actually. At first, when it came along, I thought, wow, this is really great. A whole different approach to fantasy and science fiction done through the romance writers, through their kind of take on things. And I'm sure there's lots of good stuff there, but it's not stuff I want to read. And that's fine. But what happened is more and more of the paranormal romance got put in the science fiction section rather than in the romance section, and they sold better than the science fiction novels ever did. So they started taking up more and more of the shelf space and pushing out what you might call the more traditionally male-oriented science fiction. And I don't like throwing out the baby with the bathwater. And I don't think that all women readers were the type who want to read those kind of women-authored books, the romantic, the stuff that comes out of the romance genre. So I'm trying to tread carefully here. I don't want to put down people who like the romance genre or read it or write it. I just don't like seeing, I didn't enjoy seeing one approach sort of push out other approaches because it had a very vigorous audience. So if somehow the romance audience took over comic books, and every publisher knew you could sell twice as many comic books that were aimed at the romance audience, you would have a problem for all the other portions. I don't really see that happening anywhere in the future of comic books. Comic books seem so different than that. And there was lots of other factors going on in science fiction that probably allowed for those romance novels to take over. And I haven't looked closely now. I don't know if that's still what's going on. Science fiction had a lot of other problems. So these vlogs are becoming kind of an ongoing lament for science fiction that used to be great and isn't anymore. So before the overrunning of it by paranormal romance, lots of my favorite science fiction was actually by women, like Ursula Le Guin, like Julian May, Karen Joy Fowler, James Tripchey Jr., who was actually a woman. So there was lots of good stuff, and the women served as a good mix in the science fiction writing world to keep men on their toes too. So anyway, I hope we will see a more of a mix of what's going on in comics, and it wouldn't hurt any of us to have more female characters well developed in our comic books. So good night, everyone. Bye-bye.